Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Yu. Helen, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey and all the wonderful things you're involved in. So over to you, Helen.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me today. Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Yu. I'm the founder and CEO of Tigon Advisory. And we provide fractional CXO services and influencer marketing to companies of all sizes. I started my own company about 5.5 years ago. I'm also a vice chair on the Global Cybersecurity Association and the global chair of market, manufacturing and supply chain for G100, with the mission to advance gender parity.
So thanks for sharing that, Helen. You've got an awful lot going on. You've got this global chair of the cybersecurity. You've got Tigon Advisory Corporation. And, there's lots of different areas that you're involved in. But can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do? You talk about gender, you talk about equality, you're talking about diversity. And I know these are particular topics that are important to you and some of the work that you do.
Yeah, let me just share with you a little bit more about my journey and how I got here, right? I actually did quite a few pivots with my career. As you notice, it's a very wide range in terms of what I do. The first pivot was from being a bean counter to a bean grower, right? That's because I started my career as an accountant and financial analyst many, many years ago, and then turned myself into a consultant to focus on financial planning, designing and building financial planning systems. 8 years later, we were acquired by Oracle. So that really total 12 years journey with Oracle in the technical capacity, also leading consulting practice, BI consulting practice there, gave me all the exposure into the value selling and enterprise sales. And then the second pivot I did was from on-prem to SaaS, and then from technical aspect, solution architecture to marketing, right? That's when I joined Adobe. And then Adobe, I joined a very early stage of their growth. And then at the time, they were known for creative leader. They were pivoting to marketing leader, digital marketing leader. Digital marketing was very new concept at the time. So, and then I pivoted again from working for a corporation to startup, right? That's when I joined Marketo later on. I was one of the leaders to establish their enterprise consulting professional services there. And then we also took the company from early to late and all the way through exit, $1.87 billion exit. And then 2 years later, Adobe acquired them, $4.75 billion. And that was how I learned about how you really take a company from a startup to scale up. That's the point where I worked for a few more startups, and then I started my own company about 5.5 years ago. So that journey, as a matter of fact, gave me the broad range of experience, right, from consulting to sales to marketing to everything post sales, and then leading in the more chief customer officer capacity, really allowed me to understand what it takes to build a great team and great company, and then scaling the company.
That's a great journey. And I know you were over 12 years with Oracle, which is, it's a global juggernaut of a company. It's huge. And you were very senior within Oracle, and obviously 12 years, that's a great career. A lot of people, very well respected roles within Oracle. It's known the world over. But I do like the fact that you started as a bean counter and turned into a bean grower. I think that's very nice. And then the Adobe story, of course, with Marketo as well, with the acquisition, you ended up as the group vice president. It was a huge role. And what a journey that must have been to see that go through all the different phases. To today, where you've got your own business, you're very focused on lots of different areas, from cybersecurity to Tigon Advisory, as we mentioned. And there's a lot going on. So you're no stranger to Silicon Valley, Delaware, and of course, Chicago. So let's talk a little bit about some other things that you're involved in. And you mentioned the term CXO. Okay, a lot of people may not be as familiar with the CXO, and you have something called CXO Spice, and I want you to maybe talk a little bit about CXO Spice and how this growth at the intersection of technology and humanity. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Simon. And I'm glad you mentioned that, as a matter of fact. So, I'm a firm believer in that growth thrives at intersection of technology and humanity, right? So I created CXO Spice with the intent to really drive the thought leadership. If you think about Spice, what that means, S is a scenario or scope of discussion. P represents point of view. I represents innovation. And then C is CXO, right? It's the C-suite executives. And then E is execution. So the intent of this platform is to really have for all the industry thought leaders to come over, share their point of view on innovation, and then explain how to make it happen in real world. I'm a fan, I love movies. I'm a fan of Iron Man. So Pepper and Tony Stark are really two of my most favorable characters, and I couldn't name it as Pepper, so I figured I'd just call it something interesting, right? So the intent is all the people who are on the show are really the Tony Stark of the tech world. So it's very interesting. The first episode we kick off about March 2021. Microsoft was the first company that I featured, and I was very fortunate to have all these thought leaders. I happened to work over the years, and then we reconnected and worked with them again. So that's one. And I'm also a curious, courageous multiplier, right? I focus on multiplying other people's joy, knowledge, and prosperity. So everything I do, either cybersecurity or AI or advancing gender parity, everything I do is with that in mind.
I love the Tony Stark reference. I think that's great. That's very, very good. And I know you personally, through your own career, before we get on to the Tony Stark discussions, I mean, you've managed hundreds of millions of dollars in P&Ls across the world. You've been on many, many boards, independent, stock market listed organizations. And that brings with it a wealth of experience. But I want to sort of maybe come on to something else, which I think is really, really great that you've done, which is this Accenture startup, the book, because you've kind of got CXO Spice with Helen Yu, but then you've also got this book, which is really touching on accelerated growth, which to me is almost like this pinnacle of this intersection that you were referring to a few moments ago. So could you maybe give us a bit more detail about what the idea was here? When did you put it together, and what people can expect if they come across Accenture Startup?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for noticing that, by the way. So Accenture Startup is really, has been in my mind for more than 10 years, right? It is a book to honor the grit and resilience growing up taught by my grandmother. And it is, you think about you have your own business, right? Scaling up or a startup is no different because it really requires the great resilience, same amount of great resilience as if you're climbing a mountain. So in this book, as you think about startup going through the journey from idea to product to market to scale. So they're going to go through 5 disconnects, right? Those are the 5 disconnects I identified in the book, where you have product market fit disconnect. And then you have everyone knows about minimum viable product, but I talk about minimum viable repeatability connect. And then it comes to the voice of the customer. No matter what you do, you have to listen to your customer and understand what to listen and how to take some of the feedback to build into or enhance your product and services. And then it gets to the process disconnect. And then lastly is the measurement disconnect. As you know, today you can go Google or Chat GPT to find answers if you know what questions to ask. So this book is really for the entrepreneurs who don't know what questions to ask. If you ever get hold of this book, you can find the 26 questions you have to ask as you get on the journey of scaling the startup, right? So that's why I find that, for me, sometimes I struggle. And, when you are building your own business, you may not know when you're inundated with the day-to-day operation details, you may not know what questions to ask and who to go to ask questions. If you know what question to ask, you can always find the answers, right? So that's why I thought this will be very meaningful for the entrepreneurs. And also most of them are based on the experience I had working with 500 plus people over the years. And then many of the stories in there have, I would say, mostly true, not necessarily the real name and real company sometimes, but you're gonna find the truth in the book.
So I think the book really helps, whether you're a founder, or whether you're a top flight CEO. It's really helpful because it sort of distills almost generations of knowledge. It's wonderful that it's dedicated to your late grandmother, but you've kind of distilled all this wisdom and all this experience into this framework. And you were talking on there, these 5 disconnects. But the things that really stood out to me in terms of the book are, the first one is where you're sort of identifying very specific industry experienced advice. So this isn't stuff that's just made up or sounds like a good idea. This is real solid advice for particularly tech startups. I think would benefit an awful lot from this. And then the other areas for me is like the wisdom that those 5 disconnects help you, and how they can almost stop you from ascending, and to make sure that you have everything in the right order. And I suppose for anybody who's trying to take a product or a service and move it to a market, particularly at scale, when you're talking about marketing at scale, I think the book really touches on that heavily. And of course, the last thing I would say is, I think it's a very inspirational guide for people, because there's a lot of trial, tribulations, pain, sweat and tears that goes into almost the emotional side and the challenging side of growing a business, Helen.
Thank you for reading my book, Simon. You said it really well, as a matter of fact, and I was going through the emotions when I was writing the book, right? You're right. And I actually took a year off to write this book. It was written with my heart and soul, and as an entrepreneur, and then also, as you said, as a business leader, because I've been in both worlds, right, the corporate world and the startup world, and I see the challenges. Even though you're not a startup entrepreneur, if you're a business leader, I hope that you can find inspiration in this book, because it's truly something that is not just from me. It's also based on some of the true stories from other leaders I've worked with. And then it's very practical. We put them in a more structured way so that people can really take some actions right after reading it. And in that book, I also laid out some of the business metrics. If you think about how you measure success based on each of the function, and then sometimes people need guides, right? Not everybody knows exactly, what to do and how to do it. And then when I climbed Mount Everest base camp, I had my Sherpa, right? In the business world, we all need a Sherpa. Sherpa does not necessarily knows everything, but the Sherpa is very good about mountain climbing, that's for sure. And that's what we need. We need to find our Sherpa at different stages of growth, because as you ascend your startup, you have to have experienced people being surrounded by them and help them guide you along the way.
I think it's great that you put it that way, because it's like climbing Everest or climbing one of the big peaks, one of the big mountains in the world. It takes an awful lot of planning. It takes an awful lot of experience. It takes an awful lot of grit and passion. But you also need the equipment. You need the Sherpa's knowledge. You need base camp. You need stuff to keep you alive. You need to plan the right way up the mountain. And what I really like about the book, and I don't say this about many books, Helen, but it's a real practical guide, and it sort of distills decades of experience. And I think that's really, really good, because there's some solid advice in there, and particularly with your track record in business. You've managed to, I didn't realize you took the year out to write the book, but it's obvious to anybody reading the book that it's real solid quality business advice. So thank you for sharing a little bit about the book with us.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate your feedback. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So the other thing I wanted to move on to, because we've talked a little bit about your career and your experience, but I want to ask you about the roles that you have today. So if we sort of move past the Oracles and the Adobes and the Marketos and all the wonderful career that you've had there, but the work that you do today, the businesses and the boards that you're involved in today, what do you love about what you do today, Helen?
I love the fact that I get to connect with people, different kinds of people. And, if you look at your career, right, there are 3 stages of our career. The first stage is learn. The second stage is, earn. The last stage is return. So I'm sort of in the middle of earn and return stage. Right. That's being said, I get to mingle with people who are still learning and people are returning. So that's a sweet spot of someone right at stage, because then I can connect the people at a global scale. And then I'm constantly learning no matter who I'm interacting with on a daily basis. Right? Either I'm on the board working with AI company, or I'm on the board, advisory board for venture capital company today, or cybersecurity, chair on that one, or working with manufacturing and supply chain, the leadership team there. So if you think about the amount of information I can absorb on a daily basis, but not only I learn from one place and then I share with others, and then we grow together, thriving together. So that feeling is very unique. That experience, you cannot get that through working for a single company, right? That's the difference where I see, that's why I talk about being a multiplier. How can you really multiply people's joy, knowledge, and prosperity? And that's how you are constantly learning and reinventing yourself, and then pass knowledge you gained to others who are eager to learn and sharing that in the community. So that's where I feel the most excited about and passionate about doing as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I suppose as being on the board in terms of the Global Cybersecurity Association, that gives you one element that you're talking about, but also through the Tigon advisory, this CXO as a service kind of approach to things.
Yeah.
And of course the Verras capital, in terms of the investment, the investing in whether it's B2B, B2C, MarTech, wellness, FinTech, whatever. But you have a particular viewpoint or a vantage point, which is quite unique. And a lot of people don't have that viewpoint. And, when you couple that with your, let's say, more traditional C-suite career, with some of the big names that we mentioned, it's a real nice vantage point. But as you say, what I really like, Helen, is it comes back to the human and the connection and the scale. So thank you very much indeed for sharing that. That's really, really good. The other thing that I wanted to ask you as well is in terms of this life stages that you touched on, because I was talking to Aisha Bursell recently, and she wrote a book. I'm going to give her book a plug as well, because she's been on one of these episodes, and her book is about the long life. She's a very famous designer. A lot of her work is on permanent display in museums. But she's talking about, the different stages of life, but also how we're all living longer now due to modern medicine, and how we have to evaluate that. And as you look at where you're at in your stage of life, how do you think your career and your outlook impacts that, as we're all facing, hopefully, if we're lucky, this longer life and this longer path? Because it gives us more time to work, or more time to enjoy life, or more time to help others, doesn't it?
Absolutely. To me, how I measure life is not necessarily about how many years I would love is really about impact, right? The value I created, the value I added to others. And, being grown, I mentioned about I was raised by my grandmother. She instilled a lot of that spirit in me, right? Where always put other interests ahead of my own. So that's how I was raised, and then what I believe as well, right? Imagine you can live in a very luxury life and being wealthy and but you can be a loner if you don't do anything good for others. And what difference does it make, right? To me, it's really, I'm really care about the social responsibilities and strengthening the tech ecosystem, through community and collaboration is extremely important to me. And what have you done for others lately? And that's what I always say and ask myself. And, if you, before you go to bed, think about what value did I create today? Right? If this were the last day of your life, would you be doing the same thing? If the answer is yes, go do it. If the answer is no, then don't do it. Right? So I always do things, everything I'm doing on a daily basis is something I would absolutely be doing, even though it would be the last day of my life.
That's a great answer, Helen. I really like that. And thanks for sharing that, the impact that you're having on a daily basis. And, if it was your last day, I'd probably be doing something like I'm doing now. That's a real powerful thing to consider. So thanks for sharing that, Helen. I want to change gear a little bit because we've talked a little bit about your own book. And I want to ask you a little bit about your own learning style. Do you like reading books yourself? Is there any particular author or genre or type of book that you like? Do you like audiobooks? Do you watch things? Do you listen to podcasts? Or do you just, I've had enough, I just need to put Netflix on at the end of the business day? How does it work for you, Helen?
It's funny. I never watched TV before pandemic ever. I knew you, and then I love reading books. Not only I love reading book, I love reading hard copy books. So I have a stack of books on my bookshelf, and my favorite book is Shoe Dog. I don't know if you've ever read. I love business books, so I've read all sorts of business books, and Steve Jobs to Richard Branson's, all and the books I have, mainly about leadership books, as a matter of fact. And there are some books I couldn't finish because I didn't like them. I just put them aside, right? But let's not talk about that being positive here, but there are some really, really great books. And then I have watched some Netflix since pandemic, right? To be honest, because there's nothing else we were able to do a certain period of time. And then besides, I took a year off writing the book. I wanted to get a little bit inspiration, but I'm certainly not someone who would burn so many hours in front of TV. I start my day reading and my day reading every single day. So I always give at least an hour of reading, sometimes 2 to 3 hours reading, depends on my schedule.
Yeah, so it's kind of there's a little bit of Netflix has creeped in there, but things like Shoe Dog that you mentioned at the start, Phil Knight, that's a wonderful book if people haven't read it. And it's just an incredible story of how that whole organization, of course, everybody's familiar with Nike or Nike today, but such an incredible startup story, and talk about a business that scaled. Incredible.
Absolutely. I mean, there are certain personal stories in there, right? I don't want to spill the bean here. It's really worth noting that every single startup and every single success, there's challenge behind every single startup, right? As you know, or company. Even, Nike is a giant today. If you look at how they started and how he created a company, and the constant, reinvention there is really inspiring story.
Yeah, I'd agree. Definitely one to read if people haven't read it. The other thing I wanted to ask you, moving away from books, is about your own inspiration. Obviously, your grandmother instilled a lot in terms of your education and your upbringing. But when you look back and you think about people that have inspired you or people that you admire, who springs to mind? I'm assuming your grandmother, of course. And what is it that inspires you, that motivates you, that helps you through life? And is there any other person or persons, or maybe it's a particular character trait that you admire?
Yeah, I would definitely say my grandmother, she is a top, she's an amazing lady with so many great attributes, right? Hardworking, straight talk, always being grateful for what she has, and then always putting others' interest on top of her own. She never had an opportunity to go to school, to be honest, but she learned everything on her own and became the best storyteller, as a matter of fact. And she was witty, honest, and she was empathetic and trustworthy all the time. And she would make the best CEO if she lived in today's environment. And there are so many other women I admire, or men, obviously I admire. But I think that no one tops my grandmother in my heart.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you said something very interesting there, because I was revisiting something recently of that Simon Sinek, who's very popular and, says a lot of clever, smart things. But he has this tale, it's many years old now, about the Navy SEALs and the type of people that they work with. And it just drew a parallel with sort of your grandmother. And, she would have made a great C-suite executive because of her human side, her empathy, her understanding, her ability to tell stories, and yet didn't maybe get the same opportunities that you were afforded because it was a different generation, didn't have the same educational background or the same career opportunities or even the same technological tools that we use today to connect with the world. But back to the Simon Sinek thing, he talks a lot about high performers. And that, when you're at the top of your game, and back to the Navy SEALs, he talks about how trust is more important than high performance. And it comes down to that human being. Do I actually trust this person? Do I resonate with this person? Is this person human and real? And they take that over just the high performance person with a low level of trust, because they don't bring the same thing to the table. They're not the people that you can rely on ultimately. And I just thought it was fascinating when you said that my grandmother would have made a great C-suite executive. I think that's a wonderful observation, particularly in today's world, where I think we are finally starting to realize the importance of the human side of business more than just the traditional building blocks, and thinking that business has to be all very hard-nosed and very, functional. I think the human, the empathy, the understanding, the diversity that we touched on earlier, it's such an important trait in building businesses. And whether it's Phil Knight at Shoe Dog, or whether it's in terms of his book at Nike, or whether it's some of the other great business leaders, you'll find that one thing that they typically have in common is their ability to work with others, their ability to trust other people, and to hire the right people around them to get the job done.
Yeah, that's very well said, Simon. As a matter of fact, being a leader and your ability to be surrounded by others who are more capable than you, and then motivate them to, or get them inspired to achieve the common goal. That's the most important for leaders. Right? Your other abilities obviously also important, but the most thing is, how do you motivate others, inspire others to drive toward a common goal? That to me is very important. As you said, trust is one of the fundamental building blocks for that.
Couldn't agree more. So what about advice then? There must be specific advice that you've received along the way. I know you offer a lot of advice and you help a lot of people, but what about advice that stuck with you? Now, that might be something from your childhood, could be something that happened to you, a few days ago, but is there any particular advice that has stuck with you that really resonates with you? Or is there a bit of advice that you really share with people because you think it's really helpful for people to know?
One thing stick with me was from my fifth grade math teacher. She said, it does not exist unless it's measurable. And stuck with me all these years. I mean, looking back, that's how I really became a data-driven leader, rather than just, it's, when you make decisions, sometimes if you don't have all the facts, how do you come up with more informative decision, right? You got to have the data. You can't just say, here, he said and she said, when there's a dispute. And in the tough economy, you have to make meaningful decision. And then the numbers, and not only the number of data, but the context of that information helps you to make better business decision, right? I find that advice really stuck with me, and very meaningful advice.
Yeah, I love that. It's there's a nice balance, isn't there, between what you feel in your gut is the right thing to do, but also being able to back that up with data. Because often you can, particularly in large teams, I think, Helen, and you'll know this better than I, but particularly in large organizations, you can get swayed by opinion rather than facts. And you can then start making decisions based on incorrect data or data that you're not even aware of.
Well, being a only woman in many meetings, you can imagine sometimes a louder voice takes over, right? But that does not mean that's the best opinion. That's why as a leader, we have to really learn what to listen and how do you leverage the data and data to really prove the point, right? Making sure that you make this decision not just based on the louder voice, but based on the facts.
Yeah, and you raise an excellent point, because we touched on Silicon Valley earlier, and particularly you can't avoid it in the tech startup world. It is changing slowly, but it has predominantly been a male orientated landscape or playing field. And it is, it's refreshing to hear you saying, often as the only female voice, you can, the person who's talking the loudest is normally the person that gets listened to, and that's often the wrong course. And so it takes a particular strength, a particular courage, a particular insight, and a particular set of skills backed up by data to help change the course of those groups of people. And you must see that every day, whether it's from an investment perspective or a consulting perspective. You must see that landscape a lot, Helen.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I grew up with 9 boys, right? I was only the youngest girl in the family, growing up with the cousins. So I'm used to that world. That's being said, you just have to be mindful in when you are the only one who's different in certain settings. You have to have all the data to back up your points. When you try to make a point and make it very powerful, that's how you make things happen.
I think growing up with 9 boys was probably a great training ground, Helen.
Absolutely.
I think you ended up leading that group behind the scenes. That's
Well,
wonderful.
I'm a survivor for sure.
For sure, 100%. So the other thing I want to ask you about, as you've obviously done an awful lot in your career, and you continue to power ahead with all the great things we've touched on. But when you plan for yourself, Helen, when you think about the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 12 months, how do you go about planning? What's on your roadmap? What are you hoping to achieve over the year ahead? How does that work for you? What does that look like?
I'm currently actively pursuing board roles. Right? I have a couple of opportunities I'm interviewing with. That this year, hopefully, I can obtain 1 or 2 non-executive director role at either private or public company. I wanted to give more, right? Give meaning that contribute more to advancing gender parity for women, and then also help advancing cybersecurity. So, and then speaking at conferences, right? Those are things that I'm actually have a few conferences lining up that I will be speaking at in the next couple months. Really look forward to being a multiplier, continue to make a difference, and then really help multiplying people's joy, knowledge, and prosperity.
Well, Helen, I don't know how you fit it all in, because you are a keynote speaker in your own right. You're a best-selling author. We talked about the host of CXO Spice. You have all the boards and businesses that you sit on, and you're still driving forward to sit on a couple of additional boards to help people. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So is there anything else before we wrap up today that we haven't touched on that you'd like to highlight to our audience? And also, and importantly, if people want to reach out and find out more about all the wonderful things you're involved in, where's the best place to send people to?
Sure. Let's start with what else I'd like to highlight here, Simon. I spent so many years to start my day with to-do list And then I recently, just realized, if you just ditch your to-do list, focus on your to-be list, right? What do you want to be? I find it fascinating because it's unleashed me, right? It unleashed you in the way that you focus on, like, for example, I took me years to figure I want to be the multiplier, right? What does that mean to you? And then everything I do every day, everything I do, all the activities around that to be, does that multiply people's joy, knowledge, and prosperity? If yes, the answer is yes, go do it. If it does not, maybe you shouldn't spend your time on that at all, right? And that's the advice I would give to others who are trying to figure out what's the best, what's next for them. In terms of how to get a hold of me, I am quite active in social media. So you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handler is YU, Helen Yu, is U Helen Yu. Same for my LinkedIn, is U Helen Yu. You can find me on CXO Spice YouTube channel, or you can find me, I have weekly LinkedIn newsletter in the CXO Spice newsletter, or you find me at conferences. Hopefully I'll see you in person at some of the conferences someday.
No, I think that's great. And you've only got to put Helen's name into, if you're looking for the book, Accenture Startup, and Helen will pop up everywhere. So it is really great. And I just want to go back to what you said in terms of not a to-do list, but a to-be list. I think that's such a powerful statement. I've heard of the list opposite of to-do, which is your not to-do list, things that you're just not going to do. But focusing on the to-be list, it really does move everything from task-orientated type work to the objective, the outcome immediately, doesn't it? I really like what you said there, because then everything that you're doing is moving you towards that to-be goal, which is an outcome, which I think is very smart. So thank you for sharing that, Helen.
And one more thing, Simon, I mean, to be grateful, right? Cultivating the gratitude. I start my day writing 3 thank you lists every single day. And I find that suddenly elevated my mood every single day, right? Being positive is so critical. No matter what you do, where you are at, sometimes everybody has a bad day, right? Don't get me wrong. But once you start writing the thank you note, it put you instantly in the positive mood, and then you're gonna find that you're gonna see the difference immediately. So I encourage everybody to think about what are the great things that are happening, not just the bad news. What are the great things that ever happen in your life every single day? And you start there, and then you land your day with, did I do everything I would be doing if this were last day of my life? So if you start your day with that kind of moment, right? Positive moment, and then reflection moment at night, and positive thank you note in the morning, you will be in a much better state, personally and professionally.
I love that. And thank you very much indeed for sharing that additional piece of information, Helen, because that's a lovely note for us to end on today. So that brings us nicely to the end of today's episode of the Global Discussion with Helen Yu. Thank you to Helen. Thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this discussion around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do all the things that I need you to do to help support the podcast. Obviously, go and check Helen out and all the wonderful areas that she's involved in. And I hope you join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So thank you, Helen. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you today.
Likewise, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Helen.